when we have an inner critic who's essentially taken on the role of our early teachers or parents or whoever criticized us for our ADHD, that part of us is just trying to keep us in line so we don't get in trouble in the outer world. Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. I want to have a really important conversation that I don't hear anyone else talking about, but that is hugely impacting us women with ADHD. It's that a lot of us inadvertently re traumatize ourselves every single day just trying to function in this world. And so I want to unpack how it is that we got here, because I think we come by it honestly, and what we can start to do instead so that we can find our ways out of this towards something more freeing. So, before we get into the now of it, I want to talk a little bit about the initial trauma many of us women with ADHD have experienced. And we might not think about it as trauma. I know I've talked about this in another episode. A lot of times when we say trauma, if you're a doctor, you think of the trauma center like where people go after an accident, like a car accident or something. But psychological trauma, a lot of times people think of big events like being robbed or your house burning down or being raped or abuse of some kind. And that can be traumatic. But what can also be traumatic and what is often more common is verbal and emotional abuse, certainly physical abuse and sexual abuse, but it's that criticism, that constant, like, you're not good enough, or why are you doing that way. And that can happen whether you have ADHD or just something else going on in your life. One of the things that I notice in the women I work with who have complex trauma is a lot of times when, maybe they have both like sexual abuse trauma and they have the verbal emotional trauma. What I find is that the sexual abuse trauma tends to actually, believe it or not, be a little bit easier to work through. But where I notice things get more challenging and can even get more stuck or sticky, because we don't want to keep people stuck, right? But where it can be more challenging is with that emotional verbal abuse and criticism, because it's every single day attacking, like, basically who we are as a human and how we show up in the world and communicating that we're not good enough. And the thing is, when we're kids, we have to believe that the grown-ups in our life are the sane ones. We have to believe that they've got it together enough, because if we don't believe that, the fear is then like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to survive because the grown-ups in my life aren't responsible enough. So as children, we tend to blame ourselves for the shortcomings of our parents. And whether their shortcomings are smaller things or they're things like abuse, we tend to blame ourselves and assume that only if we were good enough, we wouldn't be told that. Or we believe those messages that with ADHD we got from teachers or principals, coaches, even, and certainly family members who were like, why are you doing it that way? Why don't you just do this? Or, gosh, you always procrastinate everything. You always have to wait till the last minute. Why can't you plan ahead? Right? Like, just some of that messaging that we got can be just as damaging as other trauma, because it's important to understand and remember that our nervous system doesn't actually know the difference. Our nervous system doesn't know the difference between a tiger chasing us, being raped, or a nasty comment on social media, or inner criticism. You can see where I'm going with this. That sounds crazy, I know, but this is a very primitive system that we have that even reptiles have. So there's no discernment that goes on in terms of danger. It's just that our nervous system senses danger and it's like, whoop. And we've got like just like a tiny little bit of time to possibly, notice that we're feeling triggered and go, oh, am I safe in this moment? I mean, it's really fast. And if we don't catch it, we immediately go into the fight or flight response. And then we're flooded with adrenaline, noradrenaline, also known as norepinephrine, and cortisol. Those kind of chemicals or neurotransmitters and neuromodulators in the brain that help us to fight or flee. Right. So we go into our fight or flight response. And that happens, like I said, whether the danger is actually life threatening, like, like a rabid dog chasing you that's you're not going to be able to get away from, or like a nasty comment, a judgment. Right. So I think that's really important to understand because a lot of times we think that that negative inner dialogue that we have, or those parts of us that we have inside that are keeping us in line, are actually trying to help us. And in some ways they are. I want to name this. We all have parts inside of us and they are all just trying to help us to the best of their ability, right? Like you may have a part who's like, why can't you just get this done? And then you have another part who's like, well, I'm doing my best, right? And so all of those parts are trying to help us. It's just that some of them are doing it in a way that's no longer effective, no longer productive, and dare I say, even possibly re traumatizing us. What I mean by that is when we have an inner critic who's essentially taken on the role of our early teachers or parents or whoever criticized us for our ADHD, that part of us is just trying to keep us in line so we don't get in trouble in the outer world. But the problem is that's not different than them still being there and doing that same constant criticism. And so our nervous system is going to respond to that. We're going to end up, the cortisol, the fight or flight response, right? All that stuff happening, not just cortisol, also adrenaline and noradrenaline, but all that stuff is going to be happening. And then, we're full on triggered. And if we're not finding ways to deal with that, that can end up getting stuck in the body. And if we do it to ourselves long enough, we may be re traumatizing ourselves over and over and over again. And the biggest way I see us doing this is forcing our beautiful ADHD star pegs into the circular hole of neurotypical life. Our brains don't function the same way that the neurotypical brain does. And that doesn't mean it's bad. It's not even different. They're just dissimilar, you know? And I guess different, fine, but like not different in a bad way, like, oh, you're different, right? But just like they have their own way of doing things, both sets of brains, right? And so when I say both sets, I mean like people with ADHD versus people who don't have ADHD, right? And so the problem is when we are constantly trying to force ourselves to function neurotypically, but we can't because that's not how our brain is. Or maybe we can if we have all these strategies and this heavy scaffolding of stuff we do to be able to function. But then we feel exhausted and don't have any time for the fun in our lives or the richness or connection, or like by the time it comes to doing our hobbies, we're just so exhausted. We're just like, I can't. Or maybe we literally don't have time because we spend so much time functioning. Like our whole weekend becomes catching up from the week instead of like, I don't know, going out for coffee with a friend or reading a book or going for a hike. So, what we need to learn to do instead, of course, is work with those inner parts of us first that believe that we have to live the same life as everyone else. Because I'm here to tell you that's not going to work. I've tried it. I've tried living everyone else's lives for a very, very long time. Most of my life until about 15 years ago or so. And what I found is it's exhausting and it feels empty. Like, it's just like, I know I felt like a shell of myself. And the reason is because we are a shell of ourselves, right? It's like if you're putting forth this, like, I don't know, I just had an image of Humpty Dumpty with like, what a weird, I don't even know this is going to be a good metaphor or analogy, but like Humpty Dumpty and his happy face on. And below that is like, wah, wah, kind of sad energy, or we feel like no one knows us or sees us. And of course, they don't know or see us because we don't let them see us. And I'm not just saying, yeah, okay, we don't let them see our ADHD. And in sometimes some spaces, like if you're still working a corporate job while you're building your business, so if you're an entrepreneur who's still working in a corporate environment, I get that you may not be like, I have ADHD, here I come, and at the same time, there's ways that we can let people see who we fully are, see our energy, our intensity, our enthusiasm, and also maybe even show them what it's like to function the way that an ADHD person does, that the way we do our schedules and our deadlines can be different, or maybe needs to be different, is a better way of saying it. And as we let people see that, then they understand us. And then those inner parts of us, because we've been working with them on like, hey, this is going to be okay, can eventually stop criticizing us, stop beating everyone else to the punch, right? But imagine if every day you got out of bed and whoever was your biggest critic of your ADHD growing up was standing there going, why can't you do this? Blah. And then at the end of the day, well, you didn't get much done today. You spent 8 hours and you got shit done. Like imagine if that person was following you around all the time. It would be exhausting. It would be re-traumatizing, right? It would be a repeat of those early wounds you got, the messages of not being good enough. The thing is you're doing that to yourself if you haven't yet worked with these inner parts of you who criticize you. You're building your own shame shitstorm. And I'm not saying that so you feel more shame. We come by this honestly, right? Like our inner system has those parts. We created this as a way to function, as a way to get by in this world before we had other options. But the good news is now, especially if you're an adult, you can make your own life. You can create a life that works for you and your ADHD, whatever that is. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're an entrepreneur or trying to be one, or maybe you're an entrepreneur with a job still. And so you're starting to know that. But as you're setting up your business, one way to keep yourself from re-traumatizing yourself is to set it up in a way that works for you. I've been in a lot of programs for creating businesses with different entrepreneurs and things like that. And they all have great ideas about what these businesses should look like. And the best programs are the ones that tell you to design it your own way, because that's the way that is most authentic to you. And when you are able to be authentic in your business, then you will attract your audience because they will feel your authenticity and they will be like, yes, I must work with her. I absolutely have to get on board with what she's offering. But as long as we're masking and forcing and trying to get ourselves to do stuff the neurotypical way, we're just re-traumatizing ourselves and we're exhausting ourselves doing it. And I don't know about you, but when I've done that in my life, I am not enjoying myself. Right? Because then we're like, well, I'll have fun once I get this done, or I'll have fun after this launch, or I'll have fun after I do the content for the week, or, I get to relax after I finish all these blog posts or whatever it is that you're doing. But like sometimes that might mean that we never have fun. And if we never have fun, that's not great for us. I've been listening to the Huberman Lab podcast and he's got an episode on dopamine, right? And he talks about being intentional about our baseline dopamine and then the peaks and try not to have too many peaks, but also like, because we want our baseline to stay where it is rather than dip down and all this stuff, right? But like if we never have those little spikes in dopamine because we don't ever do anything that lights us up, like that's not helpful for our baseline dopamine. And if you don't know this already, we need dopamine with ADHD, especially because we don't have as much, or it's not as available in our brains as it is with the neurotypical brain. We need all the dopamine we can get to get ourselves to focus and for our executive functioning to work. And so it's important that we take time out for fun every day. I dance almost every day. I either tap dance on days that I do strength training, or I do bar as a type of uh, kind of more muscular endurance strength training. And then I do Zumba because, first of all, that gets in exercise, but it is so fun. I'm laughing and smiling and making faces alone in my garage. At least I can see my reflection in the window. So at least I'm smiling at myself. Which is a whole other thing with ADHD, right? We like to see ourselves. But it's really important that we find ways to have fun. And sometimes that might be big things, like I went to a Twins game this summer for Harry Potter, or trips up to the cabin, or, it could be maybe you go to the symphony or the opera or a play, or maybe you have fun in different ways that I don't think of because I don't have fun that way. But to make sure that you're getting out and having fun and doing things is really important. But if you're forcing yourself to live neurotypically, you're going to spend most of your free time managing. You're going to spend most of your free time managing your symptoms, trying to force yourself to mask your ADHD, and you won't have your best authentic life. And that's traumatizing. That's sad. And so I would encourage you to find a way to step out of that so that you can enjoy your life. And it might be, like it doesn't have to be a big thing. It might be that you're like, huh, yeah, okay. Maybe I can just even get out for a walk every day, like find a way to have fun. Or, I was reading, I can't remember the title. It's a book on ADHD. I'm usually reading like 3 books on ADHD at a time, which is par for the course, right? It's totally true. But one of them was talking about like, if I talked about dead time in a recent TikTok of mine, I might even mention it in the last podcast, right? Like if you have an appointment and all you can think about is that appointment coming up and you're not able to focus, the book was talking about different ways you could use that time. And one of them was like, if you just can't figure it out, go do something fun, because why fight yourself? Like, if you have an appointment at 11 and you're ready to start work at 10, but you're just like, I can't focus because I got this thing at 11. Well, there's strategies you can try to focus, or like, you can take a break, or, get yourself to write out all the feelings that you're having about this upcoming appointment and kind of work through that. And then as you do that, you might be able to focus better on the tasks at hand until your appointment. But if that's not working, go have fun. Like use that time to go do something fun. Because if it's not going to be productive work time, then why not go do something like that you enjoy rather than fighting yourself? It's just another example of how we can stop fighting with our ADHD and instead create our own unique ADHD life. Another piece I want to talk about is how we deal with these inner parts of us, that inner critic that is like, oh, you're not doing that well, or you did a shitty job there, or shaming us when we're not functioning the way that we think we should be functioning, which is usually the way that we were told we should be functioning, which is usually how neurotypical people function, right? And so when you're noticing that part of you, like I know that our instinct is to say, go away, push it away, stop doing that. And I got to tell you, that will make it worse. That will make it so much worse, because that part has a legitimate concern. That part of you, I guarantee, has a legitimate concern. It probably has something to do with like being in trouble or being seen as not good enough or feeling not good enough or something like that. But the worst thing to do is to push it away, because it will just get louder, right? Like my cat Eva, when she wants a treat, if I ignore her crying, like she wants treats all day, right? She gets 2 treats in a day, which I think is generous. and she cries constantly at the treat thing. And by the way, I'm feeding her enough. Like she's not a starving cat. If you have a cat, you know how this goes, right? She's just bored, but oh my gosh, the toys that girl has, seriously. But anyway, she'll stand at the treat thing crying. And I tried for a long time to ignore, because I'm like, okay, I'm not going to pay attention to this. But what I like, even, sometimes I give her the treat, but if it's too early or whatever, I'm like, I'm just going to ignore. Maybe she'll stop. Well, she doesn't. She gets louder. So now I've started saying, "Oh, Eva, honey, I can see that you want your treat. I get it. Everyone wants a treat, but it's too early for your treat, sweetie. It's too early. You'll get your treat later. I promise I'll keep track of it." Somehow this works. Like I've been consistently saying this and it works, right? If we can work with our inner parts in a similar way, although maybe less parental, and instead from a place of curiosity, right? Like I don't have to be too curious about why Eva wants a treat. Chances are she's either bored or hungry or just feels like a treat, right? It's probably not this hugely complex thing. But when we have a part of us that's like, get your shit together, or criticizing us or shaming us or whatever goes on, if we can pause and lean in and be curious and say, like, hey, I see you. You're very concerned right now. And I want to understand what the concern is, and try and be as genuine as you can. But to create some space from this part of you that is trying to force you to do things the neurotypical way. Because it's not going to work. I don't know about you, but I tried that for a long time, like trying to get myself to do things neurotypically. And I mean, I can kind of do it, but it's exhausting. And like I said before, you end up spending all of your time doing that when there's actually ADHD ways of doing things that will be faster for you, right? But before you can get there, it's important to sit with this part of you and be like, tell me what's going on, and more likely than not, they, might be like, well, first of all, I'm tired of you pushing me away. And you can be like, okay, that's fair. Right. Really try and understand and say, okay, what else? Chances are they're going to say, like, I'm just trying to help you not make an ass of yourself, or I'm just trying to help you get stuff done. And then you can like greet that with compassion and be like, oh, yeah, I want to get stuff done too. Thank you for working so hard to try to help me to get stuff done. And to work with this part of you around, like, hey, I get it. I want to get stuff done too. And you know what? You learned early on that the best way to get stuff done is to force ourselves to do it this other way. But I'm actually learning something different. That when we force ourselves to do it that way and we shame ourselves after and we criticize ourselves, it makes it harder for us to do the work. Not just today, but then the next time. And so seeing if that part would be willing to soften back and just witness you trying it another way and letting it know, like, you might not get it right immediately. It might take some tweaking and like trying different things. And the other thing to notice is that a lot of times with ADHD, we might try something for a while and it works great. And then the novelty wears off, so it doesn't work as well anymore. And so then we shift to something else for a little while. It's about being flexible. And so if we can work with this inner part of us that's criticizing and shaming and trying to force and, making us be neurotypical, then we can stop re-traumatizing ourselves with the criticism and the shame, with the forcing, with the forgoing of who we really are. And then we can let our ADHD star egg shine out. And it will be awesome. I made this sound easy. It might be simple, but it's going to take some work. And at the same time, it's really important work. Because if instead we choose to let that inner voice or those inner parts criticize us and try and force us to do things the old way that we were taught we had to, we're just going to continue to feel like crap. And that's going to build up and build up and build up, just like the trauma of being told that as a kid has. So I'd love to hear how this lands for you. Please share in the comments. And also, if you're not already, please follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and be sure to share. Take care.